Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing multiple moves that the Sharks have made here on the opening day of free agency. So basically, the Sharks have been heavily involved in the free agent frenzy. There have seemingly been a ton of moves around the NHL as most teams struggle or try to take advantage of the fact that there is a flat cap set for this year. The cap has not gone up as it usually does, and so a lot of teams having to shed some big contracts, and a lot of teams that had the cap space looking to take advantage. And the Sharks are one of those teams that did have a bit of cap space coming into this free agency, and they managed to make use of that, especially with the buyout of Martin Jones yesterday helping that out. So the first deal to talk about would actually be a trade and sign, as the Sharks traded over a 4th-round pick to the Arizona Coyotes to bring back Lane Pederson, who they then signed to a 2-by $750,000 deal. He was apparently a player who impressed the Sharks significantly this season when he was playing with the Coyotes, and as such, they decided to bring him in. And this is basically just putting even more of an emphasis on what Doug Wilson has talked about as of late, which is the theory of competition for the San Jose Sharks. He felt as though there just wasn't enough competition for roster spots this past season, and so he wants a lot of the younger players to actually be competing for just a couple of roster spots so that all of them push each other and then the best players end up making it to the team. He doesn't want multiple roster spots for multiple young players, and as such there isn't really much doing there. He wants to see that fight from all of them to see if they can make the roster, and Pederson is just going to add to that by being another body who could make it to the Sharks starting lineup. Another signing, and this going more in the veteran direction, is Andrew Cogliano at a 1-year, $1 million deal. Was with the Dallas Stars. He even made it to the Stanley Cup Finals with them just a couple of years ago, and now with the Sharks, basically just a veteran presence here. He'll probably play some on the 4th line, maybe get a bit of penalty killing time, as he does have some of those defensive instincts still. He certainly can't really be relied on to score any goals or get any points really, but he is a player who, if some of the younger players aren't necessarily working out, you could potentially just sort of put him into the lineup to play 8 to 10 minutes. Still has a bit of speed to his game as well, as he was always a very speedy player. He's not a player who I suspect should play a full 82-game season. I'd be rather disappointed if he did play a full 82-game season for the San Jose Sharks, because they do have some younger players who should be getting even more opportunities than a player like Cogliano, but he definitely doesn't hurt. And again, he's sort of an emphasis on that competition where it's, oh, well, if you can't outperform this veteran type of player who we know what we're going to get from, then he's just going to get that roster spot. Next, let's move on to players who we should be more assuredly getting the full season from, and that is Nick Bonino. Doug Wilson had been talking about trying to address the 3rd-line center position, and he does so with this signing. 2 years at $2.05 million per year. Nick Bonino, of course, Sharks fans will remember him from his days on the HBK line with the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2016. Him, Hagelin, and Phil Kessel made up a 3rd line that Sharks just could not deal with in the Stanley Cup Finals, and the Sharks finally get to bring him over to San Jose, which funnily enough was the team he was drafted by all the way back in 2007. Benino, still a pretty effective forward with the Minnesota Wild, actually put up a pretty decent amount of points with them, and so we should suspect that he will be a very consistent 3rd-line center for the San Jose Sharks. Honestly, a very good signing that I enjoy very much. And finally, the final signing, at least to talk about at this point, because we are not even done the day just yet, and the Sharks do still have a decent amount of cap space left even after having to sign Adin Hill. The Sharks bring in former Sharks goaltender James Reimer. Now, he was only a Sharks goaltender for a very short period of time. This was also back in 2016, but he was extremely good when he was with the Sharks during that time. I believe in like the 9 regular season games he played down the stretch after the deadline, he had something like 2 or 3 shutouts. So very, very impressive at that moment. And then he moved on, eventually ended up with the Carolina Hurricanes, and he's been okay with them. This past season wasn't fantastic, but that's really all the Sharks could be hoping to get. They just want a goaltender who can at the very least outperform Martin Jones and Devin Dubnyk, and I feel like that isn't really that much to ask. Reimer's stats this past year were decent but not fantastic. A 9.06 or 0.906 save percentage with a 2.66 GAA is about league average, maybe slightly below league average in terms of the save percentage, but it should be remembered that Reimer was on the Carolina Hurricanes, a team that does not give up a ton of shots, so it is not a huge surprise to see the save percentage a bit lower and the goals against average a bit higher. This is also a signing that I do think is pretty good for the Sharks. It's exactly what they were needing, a 2-year at $2.25 million per year. The 2-year does worry me slightly, just depending on how Reimer actually looks in this first year, but I guess this was a sacrifice to make to get the actual dollar value relatively low, so that Reimer can have a bit more of a secured future, I guess you could say. And so in general, I do enjoy all of these signings. Benino, really the one that sticks out to me, is one that I am really happy about. Pederson is definitely an interesting one as well. I do remember watching him with the Coyotes, and he was okay, but it's not anyone who stood out amazingly. But at $750,000 and only a 4th-round pick in terms of the trade, certainly a very low cost to bring him over to potentially be a good young player for the Sharks. So a lot of signings here. They've made a lot of moves. Will this move the needle enough to move the Sharks back into a playoff position for the next season? I guess we'll see. Class dismissed.